Hello, good morning to you. Today I'm going to be taking us through the book Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. Here it is, Dare to Lead. And if I have like 3 seconds of your attention, I'll sum it up by a quote sheet or paraphrase by saying that courage in this context is having the courage to show up when you don't know the outcome. When there's no determined outcome and the outcome's not clear and you can show up, that's courage. That's what this book is about. I'll just stay with summing it up for a moment. This book is a little bit more geared towards the workplace than the home or domestic environment, and for me that's a big plus. I've always seen the correlation between the home and family and the workplace. We spend most of our time at work. That's a generalization. Those that work spend a great deal of time at work, and the workplace, the colleagues and so on, that's a community, that's an environment, that's a family of sorts. So I think this is tremendously relevant. So if you're new to Brene Brown, which you're probably not, but just in case you are, who is she? Who is she? Well, that's an interesting question, because most people have seen, or at least are aware, that she did a TED Talk back, 6-7 years ago. Tremendously popular, millions and millions of views. So most people think of her as a speaker and the author, which of course she is. She's published 5 or 6 books by this point. She's got the Netflix special, of course. Very, very much in the zeitgeist of new thought and contemporary self-development, right? She's known to be the Houston. But what I wasn't so aware of through reading this book is she does a tremendous amount of work in the field of leadership with CEOs and companies you've heard of, like Pixar and some of the British banks and so on, like big stuff. And they're not bringing her in because she's popular, they're bringing her in because she's good. And she is coming in to speak and coach and educate on the field of vulnerability, not in the hand-wavy, cozy, sweet, latte-waving sense that vulnerability is considered, but in the context of this is what makes things happen or not happen. This is what makes things work, or this is what makes things fall apart. If you've been watching me do these reviews over the last few months, let me say that this is the first book I've actually recommended to some peers of mine that we're working on some really long-term projects on. Because I don't tend to do that. I'll recommend books to clients and so on in sessions when I feel like more information, context on something would help or serve them. But to friends and so on, what right have I got? So I really very much believe in the messages in this book. I can't sum Brene Brown up in one context. I should have said wife, mother. She applies herself into so many different ways and expressions. Having been listening on and off to Brene Brown over the years, I have to say, I am fascinated by who her husband is. She's very forthright in sharing about areas of her life and honest and authentic about it. And often shares about dialogue she has with her husband. I'm always amazed at the wisdom and presence that her husband has. And of course, that's a reflection of them having been married a long time, like 20-30 years by this point. Each of them knowing themselves very well and each other very well. And it's fascinating to get. She's very also, I think, generous in reflecting the dialogues between her and her husband. But it's illuminating, certainly. Anyway, on to the book. If you just jumped on, this is what we're doing today. So, this is a leadership book, and you know, there are, I'm forgetting his name now. Oh, how embarrassing. There's someone that's so well known in the field of leadership. His name is escaping me right now. John someone. Oh, so embarrassing. Anyway, I think of that guy a bit more in the field of leadership than I do with her, with Brene Brown. But this is a book geared to leadership and the field of corporate training, shall we say. So, what's the relevance? What's the relevance? Because one of you watching might not be at work, might not have worked for a while. What's the relevance? What's it got to do? John Maxwell, thank you, Randy. Thank you. Absolutely. What's the relevance to this if you don't work? Well, the relevance to this is that, look, you're probably a member of a family, you're probably a member of a group of friends, you might be a member of a church group or something like that, and your voice matters and it counts. Even if you're none of those, you're a member of the human race. And if you're watching this on Facebook right now, we're all having an interesting experience with Facebook this year, aren't we? Social media. How are we going to share and express our voice? How are we going to give our voice in a way that it will be heard and received, right? Because there's a lot of venting going on and so on. So I find it tremendously relevant right now, and every one of our voices are tremendously important, right? How I'm going to cover this book, rather than going through chapters as I have, as summing up chapters as I have done with books in the past, I'm actually going to just go through themes, because there's a lot in here. This is a book I'm going to, over the course of my life, read probably 3 or 4 times, because she conveys and explains some of these themes really, really well, and I find it very important. So, getting out the gate then, what does courage have to do with vulnerability? What does vulnerability have to do with courage? Well, for those, say, leading companies and leading teams, and I'm just going to read a couple of things off here. What's happening in leadership where there isn't courage is the tough conversations are getting avoided, productive feedback's not happening, trust is lower, risks aren't being taken, the creative risks aren't being taken, people getting stuck in failure, setback, disappointments, which happens, doesn't it? It all happens. More time is spent on shame and blame than accountability. The solutions that people think of are unsustainable, they're ineffective, they don't work, or they're just slapped together. Of course, then there's things like perfectionism, competition, and all of that. That's what's happening when there isn't vulnerability and courage coming from the top. So, she tells this story about going to speak at a military base, I think in the Midwest. This must have been quite recently. And you can just imagine Brene Brown showing up to a military base and just being met by thousands of stony faces. So at one point she says, can anyone give me an example of an act of courage that did not require vulnerability and risk? And no one says anything. It's like silence, cricket. And then at some point someone sticks up their hand and says, no, can't think of any examples, right? These are soldiers, right? These are soldiers. These aren't it's not a church group. That's what I'm trying to say. So she gets into talking about the range of differing opinions about courage and leadership. Because there's a lot of those in the field of a lot of the leaders she spoke to said, well, courage, it's a trait. You've either got it or you don't. And she's saying this is not true. Courage is a skill, and you can learn it, and you can practice it, and you can develop it. Maybe look at that later. So, I'm going to talk about vulnerability now. Because this is not her first book, and I think vulnerability is not fully understood what it is and what it's not. And she actually talks about this, and she said, I think the part that caught my attention was she says, vulnerability is not gratuitous oversharing. Just because you feel like being vulnerable, or you're willing to be vulnerable, or you say you're willing to be vulnerable, doesn't mean it's the right person, doesn't mean it's the right context to do so. Vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. I'm just going to say that again. Elephants above. Vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. She tells a lovely story about I think one of her kids at the school that one of her kids goes to, and in her class, in her daughter's class, each kid has a glass of marbles, right? And every time someone in the class does something kind or shows up, they put another marble in the jar. And every time the opposite happens, they take it out. And the point being that as the jar fills up or doesn't, it's incremental. It's made up of little steps. And she's saying, Brene Brown is saying, that trust is not, you don't generate trust immediately. You can't build trust like that. You build trust incrementally in small amounts. By small acts repeatedly is how you grow trust. The relevance of this is, let's say in the corporate environment, or screw it, just in life. Often people will use the T word, trust, when in a crisis, and at that point it's usually too late, isn't it? Marriage isn't working. Someone lets you down. Someone breaks your trust, lies to you, whatever. Too late to say. It's too late to lead with hey, trust me. No, you've got to build up trust continually and repeatedly when it's not needed, as it were. And that's how you build relationships. Okay. Hard conversations are a big part of a big part of this book and a big part of our lives, isn't it? I'm sure some of you have hard conversations to have today. never mind this lifetime. Hard conversations to have today. Brene Brown's got the buzzy terms. She's good at that. So one that caught my attention here is treasure hunting. So it makes it easier to go and have a hard conversation, to go have a challenging conversation if you're treasure hunting. That is to say, you know what you're looking for. Because, by the way, you guys know I'm doing this in one shot. That sound you're hearing is the sump pump. We've just had a ton of rain here. I don't have someone flushing the toilet just here. I'm just doing this completely live, and that sound's going to happen probably about 10 more times while we're together here. Anyway, hard conversations. Easier when you know what the outcome you want to happen is. No, that's incorrect. When you know what you're serving the two of you to achieve. That's fairer to say. That's fair to say. Because why don't people have tough conversations? They get stuck on the first part of it. It's like, that first part of it is a transient thing. It's a station on the way to another destination. So she calls it treasure hunting. And it's easier to push through challenging things when you know the treasure, as in someone feeling better, that you're looking for. When you have a hard conversation, it reveals what's going on under the surface. But I want to say something about this. That under the surface is not a static thing. You can have an emotion that's just under the surface, of course. We often do. But I often observe that some of the stuff going on the surface is almost like an abscess. It's deeper than that. I've had conversations this week. People don't realize they've got fears about someone dying. They don't realize they have fears about being lied to, being stolen from, taken from, illness and all of that. And that's beneath the surface. I hope this is making sense. It's so deep you don't know it's there, but you can feel it's there, and it's influencing your thoughts and behavior and so on. So open communication, let me get back on track here. Open communication, as she calls it, solves that, resolves that. But more importantly, it prevents things from happening. And that I think is the revolutionary idea in the field, in the corporate or team-related environment. That if the more that open communication is fostered, and not, forgive me, the bullshit open communication. You've all had someone going, "Hey man, I'm going to be real right now," or something like that. It's like, we all know when someone's being authentic and when they're not. So open communication will prevent things going on down the line. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to prevent something than to unwind, fix, and resolve it. One of her expressions here is to lead with heart, not with hurt. So to lead with receptivity, openness, compassion, as it were, rather than the hurt of the past. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. I should have said this earlier. So, from the book. So she's giving one of her talks a few years ago, and this guy bounds up to her at the end and says, "Yep, I know what I got to do. I'm ready. I know what I got to do," which is exactly the sort of reaction you don't have when you know you've got to do something difficult. So she says to her, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And she said, and I think this was a CEO or senior executive, as it were. He says, "I'm going to go to my board and I'm going to tell my board that we don't know what we're doing and we're hemorrhaging money." And she says, slow down. Do you really think your board are the best people to say that to?" And he pauses. And she says, "I think you should do that. I think you should be vulnerable and do that. But I think you should go, first of all, to a mentor of some sorts and get that out and begin to generate some solutions and then go to the board with that honesty. Because it would be going against the interest of the organization, the board, and all of that, the company, to continue going down a road because you don't want to admit that you're wrong, okay? But even better than that is to go with a solution and that honesty, right? That's what I'm trying to explain here. So the next thing to talk about is shame and empathy. If it's one word that I associate with Brene Brown being good at, being very supportive with, it's the subject of shame. Shame makes people feel unworthy. Even before I really knew much about Brene Brown, the thing I would hear people quoting all the time is guilt is I have done something bad. Shame is I am bad, right? Shame is sucky. And empathy is the antidote to that. Important subject to talk about is, what is empathy? What is empathy? Because here's what empathy is not. Empathy is, you ever shared something with a friend or a member of family, colleague or something, about something that's going on, and they immediately launch in with, "Oh yeah, that same thing happened to me," or maybe you see a reaction on their face, or they start trying to fix, or they start trying to advise you. All of that is not empathy. Empathy is being with someone when they're being open with you, just being with them. I'm not going to get into the energetics of it right now. I'm not going to get into the metaphysics of it right now. That's not that conversation. But to quote Brene Brown, empathy is connection to emotion, not experience. She's got an interesting timing figure. She says 8 seconds. 8 seconds is the amount of time that you have to sit through discomfort before something changes. And it's interesting because I would have said it was more like 2 minutes. But I trust her because she's looked at like 400,000 pieces of data and I haven't, right? But if you think about why you don't want to open up or share or any of these things, it's because of discomfort, isn't it? Of some sort. She's saying that degree of discomfort, that painful discomfort only lasts for 8 seconds. And then it gradually gets better. But with regard to empathy, which is the antidote to shame, she says, and I agree with that, it is, if you want to have empathy for someone, then it's being with them, it's holding the space, which makes it okay, if I sum it up, rather than vocally commenting on it. Right, okay. I'll talk about confidence. That's a big area that shows up in this book. Of course, practice builds it. Practice builds confidence. Practicing vulnerability, practicing using your voice, practicing sharing. And I'll say it again, what does all this mean? What are you practicing? You're practicing risking showing up, using your voice, even though you don't know what is going to happen. That's what you're practicing. I noticed the word curiosity showing up a lot in this book. What's it got to do with confidence in this case? Is curiosity helps us learn from our mistakes, right? Curiosity helps us ask questions. A vulnerable leader, strong leader, is going to be asking questions. They're not going to think they're right all the time. They're not going to think they know what to do all the time. A strong leader asks for help. And I'll say again, everyone's a leader. Everyone's a leader. A leader doesn't mean the boss. A leader means showing up with as much of yourself as you can and you have. When with that, it helps us reframe failure as a learning experience. And I'll give you one of her examples on that. CEO of Old Navy, that's it, Old Navy. Old Navy wasn't doing well, this is just a few years ago. And forgive me, the name's not coming to mind, I don't think it matters. The CEO decided to let go of good and bad, as it were. And periodically, regularly and periodically, they'd have reviews, team meetings from micro to the macro, and would continually reframe these outcomes, these periodic outcomes, as learning experiences. And fast forward 3 years later, sales had increased by $1 billion. $1 billion, right? That's a lot. That's a lot. That speaks to it. So what's happening as you're reframing and you're not blaming and you're holding accountable and things are not positive or negative is people are staying upbeat, they're staying confident. They're not thinking they've done a bad job. They're feeling included, they're feeling belonging, there's inclusion. And that is what I'd say generates $1 billion in this example. Talk about values now. If any of what I'm saying is interesting to you, then maybe at some point head over to her website because there's lots of resources that complement this book on there. One of them is a list of 100 values. So what she suggests in this book is you go there and you whittle down those 100 values down to 2 because she says we need to be able to name our values. Name our values. So here's what happens when you go there. She says when she takes people through this, usually they have a tough time with it and they end up with like 15. But she said no, whittle it down to 2 because if you have lots of values, you don't really have values. So when I did this, I whittled 100 down to 20, and then I whittled 20 down to 18, right? So I was like, need to do better at this. Whittled 18 down to 6, and then I got down to 2. And if you're interested in what my values that I'm aware of from this, it is courage, and it is, oh my God, my brain. I'm so embarrassed. Oh dear, I just did this as well. Fairness, courage and fairness is what I realized mine was. And I say realized because I don't know if I would have thought of that. But what's this got to do with courage and vulnerability and everything? What's got to do with it is You know what your values are because you align to them. And you know what your values are when you don't. And it's like a horrible feeling, isn't it? It's like a slimy feeling when you know you should do something but you don't. And she calls that the slippery behaviors. When you know what your values are, you can augment that. You can augment that. You can become more of it. And that's where values come into it. Values what? Values is all over this, but okay, on we go. She's got a section, she talks about shitty first drafts. Shitty first drafts. There we go. She's not afraid of the S word. I like that. Shitty first drafts. What does this mean? Well, this is on the subject of we've all got this story in our head that plays out when we have a reaction, right? Someone's lying to us. Someone's trying to control us. I'm really bad at that. Okay. She conveys it to, let's say the first time you write a story or you give a commentary on it, it's the shitty first draft you do before you edit it, before it's edited, and it's your extremely honest feelings. It's a long part of the book, which I'm not going to even try and condense here. But the exercise is to say to yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself? What's the story I'm making up here? Because there is one. There is one. When you know what that is, you can start to be skeptical about it. When you know what that shitty first draft is, or the story you're making up and telling yourself, you got some detachment from it. You've got some cool observance on it. And in her teams, they'll say this to each other. They'll say, what's the story you're making up about this? What's the story playing out in your head about this? And they'll say that to each other. So, oh, you know what? I'm just going to read a couple of sections from it. Short sections, okay? I really like this. I really like this one because no one likes being criticized, do they? And so let me read this to you. If you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked on occasion, then I'm not interested in or open to your feedback. There are a million cheap seats in the world today, filled with people who will never be brave with their lives, but who will spend every ounce of energy they have hurtling advice and judgment at those who dare greatly. Their only contributions are criticism, cynicism, and fear-mongering. If you're criticizing from a place where you're not also putting yourself on the line, I'm not interested in what you have to say. Okay? So what she's also saying there is she is interested in the opinions of people who are putting themselves on the line, who are daring, who are risking, who are showing up, right? And that's important to note because I forget who said this, but you know, why do we take advice from people who aren't doing what we do? The last thing I'm going to quote from here, she's talking about self-trust, and she has an acronym for developing this called the word anachronizes, if I'm using it correctly, to braving, B-R-A-V-I-N-G. And it's B for boundaries, R for reliability, A for accountability, V for vault, I for integrity, N for non-judgment, and G for generosity. And let me just explain what a couple of those words mean in this context. So there's boundaries, I'm sure we all know what that means. Vault, V-A-U-L-T, vault. What she's saying there is if someone shares something with you in confidence, you keep it in confidence. And so if someone happens to walk into your room or phone you up and tell you what someone else just did, and they're betraying their confidence, well, they're probably going to betray yours as well. And so it's for us to look at, well, where do we share about something that's not our business to share, and keep it in the vault and cultivate our own self-trust. So then there's non-judgment, the N of braving. It's not about being non-judgmental to other people or people being non-judgmental to us. Because you ever heard someone say, "Yeah, I'm not judging you," and it's like a bullshit. You just did, and you just told me you did. That's what people are doing when they say they're not judging you. So it's not about that. It's about, and I'll just quote it here. Did I ask for help when I needed it? Was I judgmental about needing help? Did I practice non-judgment with myself? Oh hell, I'll just read a couple more things out. Boundaries. Did I respect my own boundaries in the situation? Was I clear with myself and others about what's okay and what's not okay? Yeah, all right, okay. She's got this expression, rumbling with vulnerability, and that's in this book a lot. I thought I wouldn't lead with that because I feel like background's got to be explained first. So rumbling with vulnerability. It's that messy, moving in the right direction experience when you know you've got to address something, you know you've got to look at something head on. Rumbling with vulnerability. What I'll say about that, what she means by that is it always eventually arrives where it should do. My very dear friend Christiella, she's got another expression. She says her expression is moving molecules. So like when you don't know what to do, exactly what to do, then you just do something in the vague direction of it, and that will help move molecules in the direction you're moving into. She's got her own process about how to move through things in here. I don't know that I love it, but you know what? I think this is a good work. I really do. So I'm not going to beat on it. Anything else to say in here? Just a couple of things I'll throw in. She tells a story about someone who was speaking to a group of airmen. Okay, and someone spoke up and said, "You know, we are exhausted. We're so tired." And the speaker thought for a while, reflected on an article she'd read in the Harvard Business Review, that sometimes feeling lonely can lead to the experience of exhaustion, fatigue, and tiredness. And so she said this, and then said, Can I see hands? Is anyone experiencing loneliness?" And every hand goes up. Every single hand goes up. And then she had a bit of a challenge with herself in conveying this, but she sure as hell got there and addressed the concept, the feeling of loneliness in several other groups of airmen and women, and fostered connection. And what I'm trying to say is the connection with that feeling was something that's not going to be put in some of these clinical manuals or buzzwordy terms, is it? Right. Last thing I'll say, she talks about the concept of armor, wearing armor, and that caught my attention because I just watched, for the second time, I watched The Mandalorian. I don't know if you've seen that. And in The Mandalorian, this guy is covered in armor from head to toe, the whole way through. And it's in the final episode where he actually takes off his mask, his helmet, you can actually see his face. And it's kind of an analogy for the journey that character is going through, of covering himself up from the world, hiding, or like we might defend ourselves from perceived criticism or people finding something out about us or whatever it is. But you know, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. She says this, I'll say this. It's exhausting to walk around with armor on. No, we all do it. I do it. And part of my everyday and long-term missions in life is to have less and less and less, because it's such a waste and drain of energy. So again, I'll say the courage to be vulnerable is showing up when you can't predict the outcome. Every single one of the 8 billion of us have that experience in some way, shape or form every day. And so that is Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. There's lots of resources on her website, like a workbook, glossary. I find this tremendously relevant. Suggest you check it out. So I hope that's been supportive in some way, and I wish you a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rest of the day, a wonderful weekend. God bless you all, and for those who want to, I'll see you Monday.